Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of BWD. In this series we do code reviews to show you when code smells, and today we're gonna focus on wrong naming. So here is the scenario. Let's suppose you have to grab some data from Mongo, and luckily for you, your life has been made easy. Because to read it from Mongo, another team at your company has developed a client library which contains all the possible clients you might need. And if you don't know what a client is, let's simply say that in this case is a piece of software which works as an entry point and lets you communicate with the database and run queries. Great, so you have been told there is this clients library, so you import a Mongo client and you create an instance simply like this. Now, if you have never heard or used Mongo before, let me just give you a little bit of context here. Mongo is a document-based database, which is a different kind of database. It's not like Postgres or MySQL, which are relational databases. Mongo does not have tables, but rather collections. And like tables have rows, collections have documents. So you can think of a collection like a bag full of books. They are all different. Some are about history, others about engineering and whatnot. But in the end, they are all books in the same bag. Okay, then you look up at the documentation and you find out that to read data from Mongo, you must call the readFromCollection method. Then pass to it the collection name and then its schema, like this. So let's suppose we're gonna get some data about the products the company sells. So we're gonna read from the collection products and then let's define its schema up here. Alright, so here we go. What's wrong about this code? Well, first point to figure out will simply be, does it work or not? And let's suppose the other team did a good job, and if we run it, we get the data we are interested in. So again, what's wrong with this code then? This code is a good example of wrong naming. And if you are told that naming is not important when you're coding, well, that simply put is a very bad advice. Always remember that coding is a social activity, and it's not only about writing code, but is also about reading code, written by others. So if you are writing code which actually works, but that is hard to understand or it creates confusion when it's read by others, then that code is wrong. So what's wrong about this code here? There are actually two errors. First one is knowledge related, let's say, and the second one is simply bad naming. So take a few seconds and try to figure them out. Alright, found anything? So let's start from the first one, which, as I've just said, is knowledge related. Here we are coding a method named readFromCollection. But is it okay to call it this way? Well, as I've explained you a few minutes ago, in Mongo there are no tables, but rather collections. So it's obvious that if you're reading any data, this must be in a collection. It's like if in a relation database you name the read method readFromTable. Of course we're gonna read from a table, that's where the data are. So this method should be simply named read, nothing more. And if you are naming readFromCollection, you are making clear that you don't know how Mongo actually works. Then what about the next one? Have you found it? Here the argument schema_read is wrong. And that's simply because if you're reading from a collection, it's obvious that the schema you're eventually passing is for reading it, not for writing it, right? So it's redundant to name it schema_read. Just call it schema. Okay, great, so this should be the right way. Eventually here you might want to rename the argument name as collection, but notice that this is not really an error. And that's because some people may like as argument name as a short way of referring to the collection name, even though I would make this explicit in the documentation. And others like me might prefer collection. But the point that I'm trying to make is that this is just a choice. And of course you might say that even calling a method readFromCollection is a choice, right? And that's true. But keep in mind that when reading code, it should be like reading an explanation. And the best explanations are the simplest. So when it comes to naming, a good rule of thumb is less is better, because what matters is to avoid confusion as much as possible. So you should not pick a name which is polluted with something that is obvious. Finally, here you might have also a database argument. I did not add it initially because I wanted to focus on the essential parts, but also because you might have one single database, or because the database might be a default argument. Great, so always remember that coding is a social activity, and naming is an essential part of it, because people will read your code and if they don't understand it, they will not use it in the best scenario. But in the worst one, if you are, for example, contributing to an open source project, they might not accept your pull request because they just look at a couple of lines and they see something they don't like, and then they're gonna think that all your work is wrong. Great, we have finally come to the end of this episode. If you like it, do not forget to subscribe and give a thumbs up, and with that said, see you in the next one. Ciao!